know the shower goes right.
All right. You? Is that a picture of Dave Lexington?
Yeah.
One in my car.
So mine is on lactic acid, which I'm sure you guys have heard before. So what is it? It is a substance that the body produces by the breakdown of glucose in anaerobic conditions. So basically when your body isn't getting enough oxygen that it needs in the various parts, and it is referred to as lactate. And muscle cells and red blood cells make the most of this, and as you can see here, there's the various levels. Your typical levels are anywhere from 0.5 to 1, and then you can see as you get more lactate how those levels increase. So it has three functions. The first one is energy. The human body makes and produces lactic acid to fuel the cells when they are working harder than they normally have to. Like I said before, when it's not getting enough oxygen, we have to produce this when you're exercising or when you're doing something strenuous. It also generates glucose. It is created in another tissue and then filtered out of the blood through the liver and kidneys. The organs break it down and convert it into new glucose so the body can use for the future, because we obviously don't want too much of this in our body because it can be harmful. And it also is a molecular signal. It helps attract cells in your immune system to heal wounds and fight infections. So it is located in various organs and tissues throughout the body. Most of the common ones are muscles, skin, red blood cells, and it also can be seen in the brain and the GI tract. You can see here the pathway kind of it and how it's used throughout those organs. So if you have too much lactic acid, it is known as lactic acidosis. And this happens when there are certain health conditions, infections within your body that make it harder to get oxygen to the cells, as I talked about before. So like if you're exercising way too hard and you're pushing your body beyond its limits, this can happen. And it is a combination of elevated lactate levels and decreased pH of blood serum. And this can ultimately be fatal, like I said before. Like I said, it's kind of occurs when you're pushing your body beyond its limits, when you're playing sports, exercising, or any type of like intense physical activity. And the symptoms of this can be, I saw was like fatigue, vomiting, nausea. So I know like a lot of athletes who kind of push themselves beyond the limits, that those conditions kind of happen. There are athletes that check and have the level test done to see how far they can push their body. So a healthcare provider will send a sample of blood to the lab to check how much of it is in the blood. They normally do their exercise and increase their levels to the highest of their endurance. So they'll continually check throughout what they're doing to see how much is in the blood and then see how much they can take. I think that pretty much hit that. And they use it so that they can train the highest level for as long as possible. So if you have too much, how do you get rid of it? Under most circumstances, it is cleared by the liver, and it is reconverted into glucose through gluconeogenesis, which is so they can still use energy without having to have used too much of the lactic acid. And it is also cleared out by the kidneys, and some treatment options are antibiotics, crystalloid fluids, vasopressors, and hemodialysis. And that's it.
In your research, when did they start the lactic acid testing? Because I wasn't aware of that.
I think it was after they did it in periods, after a certain amount of time, and then they kept increasing how strenuous it was, and then they kept checking it to see how much was in the blood. I'm not sure exactly when, but
Did they do it here for you guys?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious because that's when we talked a lot about exercise and stretch physiology. It's light years different,
Mm-hmm.
and it was starting to change when we were in school at collegiate athletes. Not that I was one, but I was a dorm with a bunch of them, that they were starting to drink Gatorade. That gives you an idea of the time. So they had sport drinks and things like that. Today, we're born dead. Crazy. To now all of this is you can do more things.
Yeah, I think it's more for like the professional athletes who are like really pushing their body a lot. That's what I found it in. So
I think that's very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's striking is because when do you typically stop playing? Mid-May?
Yeah.
So surely if you're going to play some venues where there's a fair amount of heat. I mean, I understand. I mean, it must get like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's always the hard part with as they were saying about what I was saying before about the field and things like that. It's got to get pretty hot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Where's your water?
Pardon me?
You have water?
He's going.
Go get some
Yeah,
water.
you can have some water.
I'll get through this.
Go get some water.
I'll get water for me.
Yay.
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Where's work? I know, I literally looked at you and I was stuck in my face.
See how I feel. That's why I like sitting back here.
My presentation is on our chapter in the immune system, and we're focusing on hypersensitivity reaction type 1. So this is just kind of a general table of contents. We're going to look at the overview, the mechanism, the allergic and atopic diseases that come with hypersensitivity type 1, and the treatments. So the overview, some key players in a hypersensitivity type 1 reaction. What makes it type 1 is focusing on the IgE mediated reaction, which IgE is one of our immunoglobulins that our body produces whenever an antigen is present. Mast cell is also a really key part in why it is classified as hypersensitivity type 1. There's 4 different types of hypersensitivity, but whenever the mast cells are present with IgE, they interact with each other and the mast cell releases histamine. Basophils is the kind of rarest white blood cell of our bodies, and it is present whenever the body is fighting allergens, which look like antigens, and it also fights parasites, other pathogens. And then histamine is the chemical that triggers our inflammation and vasodilation. So we'll see, like, whenever you have hay fever and you get like an itchy nose, runny nose, histamine is present and is causing this inflammation. So looking at the mechanism, there is, to like kind of dumb it down, there's about 6 steps. Step 1, your allergen invades your body and it looks like an antigen, and your body takes like bee pollen or just like an outside environmental kind of molecule and sees it as a threat, so it shows up as an antigen. So then the body takes the next step to produce a lot of IgE molecules. So those IgE molecules are sent out and attached to these mast cells. So you have your mast cell and then you have your IgE, and it basically just covers the entire mast cell. So that is the steps 1 through 3 are called like the initial reaction. So that is how your body becomes like sensitized to this allergen. So whenever the same antigen is present in your body, so whenever you go encounter bee pollen or like dander again, your body recognizes it, and the antigen binds to this IgE attached mast cell that I talked about earlier, and it triggers that degranulation, the release of histamine, and all the other inflammatory mediators. So your step 6 is your histamine triggers the vasodilation and the smooth muscle contraction and the inflammation that you often see with like your symptoms of having hay fever, allergies, all that. So there's a couple of diseases that come with type 1 hypersensitivity, allergic asthma. So when I was little, there was something called the Big 8, but they recently just discovered the Big 9 for food allergies. So it's sesame, peanuts, soy, tree nuts, wheat, seafood, milk, fish, and eggs. So these are the most common food allergies that you will see, and especially in like a younger population, kids get diagnosed with these food allergies. And they don't really show up too much in adults, but it does occur. And then allergic asthma is another one. So that one up here, animal dander, pollen, dust mites, bee stings, and mold can all trigger allergic asthma. So not only are you having an allergic reaction, but you also, your asthma flares up. So you get put on a bunch of medications to kind of solve both, which is not super fun. Your allergic rhinitis, or that's like your hay fever, just your seasonal allergies. I know outside it kind of smells like flowers and pollen now, which is really nice, but everyone's allergies might be getting triggered. Your dermatitis, which includes your eczema. So whenever you have like your typical like red patches that you'll see with eczema, and then your allergic conjunctivitis. So usually when people think of conjunctivitis, they think of like pink eye, but your allergies can also like make your eyes appear red and like itchy. So that's another way that you can see the eyes flare up. So some treatments for this hypersensitivity type 1, epinephrine. So you can see this in EpiPens and Auvi-Q. Those are like the brand names for the immediate epinephrine medicines, where you see that mostly in patients that have anaphylaxis, which is when their airway just like completely shuts. You'll see like they have a bunch of hives that cover them. Their throat gets completely swollen shut. Like you might see their eyes get swollen shut. So the epinephrine will attack the airway and reduce that swelling and inflammatory mediators to kind of give patients relief until they can get to the hospital and get treated there. But it's like an immediate effect that kind of relieves these symptoms. Bronchodilators, you can see that in your allergic asthma patients. I know that I have a bronchodilator, and it helps just kind of open those airways. Specifically an albuterol inhaler, it works pretty quickly to relieve those symptoms as well. And then you also have your nebulizer, which I don't know if anyone's ever used a nebulizer, but my brother has severe food allergies, and every night he would have to use this nebulizer. It looks like a big vape machine, and like you basically inhale this liquid and you like blow it out, and it's kind of crazy, but it has medicine in it that helps you open up your airways and helps your breathing at night. Antihistamines, that's like if you would take an Allegra or a Zyrtec, something like that. Just they work to kind of relieve like seasonal allergies. Or I know at the allergist office, if they are doing a food challenge on a patient, they will give a Zyrtec or an Allegra if they start to have symptoms of an allergic reaction. And then your immunotherapy, you can increase your exposure slowly to an allergen. So this can either be through ingestion. So at the allergist office, if you have a food allergy, but your IgE levels are low enough and they want to test you, they'll give you very, very small amounts of the substance that you're allergic to. So like they'll give you a little bit of peanut butter and then wait a couple hours, give you another one, give you a higher dose, and see if you have a reaction and try to get you to not be allergic and have like the reaction to the allergen. And then also injection. So like if you have bee stings, they'll give you a little shot, come back in a week, give you another one to try to lessen your reactivity to the specific allergen. And that's pretty much it. And these are my references.
As common a problem as anything that we see, more of us are interesting. I think it's getting worse than better.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of it, I think there's a lot of environmental agents that trigger this that are here. I think the treatment is better.
Yeah.
And really the advent of the non-drowsy, the Zyrtec family has been a big plus, as opposed to we just took traditional antihistamine for days. I was in a med school class, and we constantly with x-rays, room dark, and just showing it, and I'm like,
yeah, and you're taking
Benadryl.
Benadryl.
He goes, why are you sitting? I said, Yeah, I took like 3 times a day and antihistamine, can hardly breathe, okay.
Yep.
Them nebulizers do work though. My brother,
They do
my
work.
brother had really bad asthma as a kid.
Yeah.
So he was on a nebulizer, but whenever like they gave us like so many of those extra little pods or whatever, whenever I was sick, the airways were closed, I just throw on that nebulizer for like a good 15 minutes and bam, I was ready for the day.
They used to use, basically it was a less modern
Yeah.
variation of those. It would be like I forget the name, that was associated, which is rare for me to forget the name. But you would steam and you put the
Yes.
pencil on it.
Yes.
And you put like a towel over your head and over that, and you inhale that.
Mhm.
And that's what we used to do all the time. Oh, my God. It's medieval.
Yeah.
It was definitely medieval.
Yep, for sure.
But that's interesting, and usually it's interesting that the anaphylactic shock reaction is in that category.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the one that's life-threatening.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's scary, but.
This year.
Mhm.
All right. Who's joining the party? Shelley, next.
Good job.
See, these are low maintenance. So, additional for those out in virtual land. I sent you that email. I decided.
This is just what you guys get.
Chelsea's influence. I'm giving you an extra half an hour.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what?
Take that online test, right? At 16 if you have time.
Thanks.
You're just so nice.
I try.
You're the
You're a very
sweetest.
Easter-giving mood.
Money will be better.
The did you say
I'm
money?
passing over you.
Alright, Dr. Stein, if you
Aziz
get a
and
collection
Mason.
basket, we'll put money in it next time. Pass it around.
Yeah.
It's so interesting up here.
Aziz and Mason.
Hey, Alexa, I'm just gonna stare at
You
you.
gotta put the, what do they say, keep the. Yeah.
What are you doing, Shine?
Why are we talking about
I'm wishing everybody a happy day. Aziz and Mason
Cash out.
means a sweet castle.
Say it,
My favorite food holiday.
Absolutely not. It's bright up here.
What?
It's bright.
What's right? Oh, okay. Put your shades on. It's you anyway. She's traveling incognito.
Could you tell it's me?
Yes.
Damn.
Nope.
Okay.
All right,
I have
everybody.
some important
Listen up.
information to share, guys. Okay. So I did my. This is the format we're gonna do it in, but I don't know. Okay.
yeah, can you like me?
No.
Really?
Can you not read that?
No.
Anyway.
Being rude to your audience members.
That's okay.
No, because it's gonna be all weird.
Just let her know the way she wants to do it. Please.
I'm so sorry.
Here you are.
Can you guys actually see it now?
Duh.
Thank you. Okay, so I did the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic nervous system. So a brief overview of ANS. It's a component of the PNS. You guys know all this, so I'm not going to go in depth and bore you. The peripheral nervous system is divided into 3 categories: sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric. I didn't really cover enteric because I wanted to focus on the other 2. Obviously, it connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body and controls bodily functions without conscious control. Something to always keep in mind is PSNS and SNS are always in opposition. So here's a really pixelated photo of parasympathetic versus sympathetic over here. You guys know sympathetic is fight or flight response and parasympathetic is rest and digest. It's just really important to note that parasympathetic, the neurotransmitters released from the postganglionic synapse are acetylcholine and the nitric oxide, and the neurotransmitters released from the postganglionic synapse in sympathetic is norepinephrine. Sympathetic, responsible for fight or flight. I'm just going to skip to the bottom part. The reactions have the physiological effects of increase in heart rate, the dilation of the trachea and bronchi, and the movement of the blood from the skin to the muscles, brain, and the heart. And the parasympathetic nervous system, like I said, is in opposition.
It has a slowing of the heart rate, the stimulation of digestion, and lowering of blood pressure. And this is kind of just their opposition of what their physiological effects are. Parasympathetic on the left and sympathetic on the right. And then this is kind of what I wanted to focus on. This is what I focused on in my paper. Is kind of the impact of trauma and how it responds like within your nervous system. It's something I've always found really interesting with PTSD is, if you get like a brain scan in a patient that has PTSD, you're going to see dysfunction and impairments in their amygdala and the hippocampus. You can like look this up anywhere in case you guys didn't know. You could look up like brain, like MRIs of like someone with PTSD and someone without PTSD and see like the differences. But it's really just an overactivation during stress, and it's like that constant like activation and inactivation of your nervous system, and it causes that functional impairment. And then the stress hormones that are secreted in those traumatic events are continuously circulating in PTSD patients. So they have defensive movements and emotional responses that continue to replay in the present. That's why you'll hear a lot of PTSD patients struggle with like triggers and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I focused my paper on. Here's a little nervous system map for it. And then something I wanted to highlight was how to regulate the SNS in like PTSD patients. They kind of have to learn and adapt to activating their parasympathetic nervous system. So obviously at first it was kind of thought that PTSD was only like present in like veterans of war individuals, but now we're like are more accepting of the fact that it's really present in like everyday lives. So a lot of people really go to like therapy and stuff, and they have to find a competent and well-trained therapist to learn how to like reactivate their nervous system. And you have to do a lot of like training like personally to learn how to like improve your own moods and like avoid those triggers, and when they do occur, like how to like kind of trick your nervous system back into like a regulatory state. So I think that was like really important and really interesting to highlight. Well, that's really all I had.
That's the interesting part at the end, that the PTSD stuff is so poorly understood. Would be the way to describe it. And its origins are interesting in the sense that we saw it in World War I and World War II. Really was the onset of what they call battle fatigue. And everybody had to associate that with an excuse for cowardice. And that was a misunderstanding. And then we began to see more of it post-Korea, but particularly in the post-Vietnam countries. And now we understand it. They thought it was just the trauma of a physical nature. But there's so much more today with emotional, the social-related trauma. You guys, I don't know how you grew up with this kind of, I'll preach the social media impact of people constantly commenting, and then they can't restrain themselves from commenting about any of that stuff. So many of them. I just don't know if they have anything to do. But that's got to have a significant impact. It's awful. Just that's me. So I mean, I think the association with that, particularly being able to find ways to voluntarily trigger an involuntary system. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Being able to do that.
I think it's really cool. Like there's a ton of different like tactics to like literally tricking yourself. Like it's just like a mind game. So yeah, like it's so cool. Like you just do certain like techniques, and you learn like so many techniques to just like slip yourself back into regulation.
Very complicated. I know. I don't suppose it's any different than like anger management problems like that. My middle one had that. You guys, and I'm sure I shared this with you. Let's go with my daughter. So occasionally she gets tested from. But both my younger two children were born with poly-addicted birth moms, which is the reason we were able to adopt relatively quickly and relatively short, which is unusual. But there was a tremendous amount of behavioral-oriented problems in all of that. I mean, to the point where my middle one was gonna be 39, I mean, you know, I had to live away from the home for like not 1 but 2 stretches in residential care, and my daughter was also for about 10 to 7 days this way. Crazy, dangerous. Not so much to me, it was my first one.
Yeah.
It was very diminutive. She was very, very frightened. It was only, you know, my older of the boys who was physically able to deal with, you know, the kind of keep things in line. You know, as a year older, he was, you know, was big, very interesting. Thank you. Great. All right, Michael, you're it, I guess. So you guys see, this is user friendly. Get these in, we'll get them done.
Just have a presentation or anything.
I need to like time myself so I don't talk.
So
You want me to ask you questions?
Fine.
Please,
Sure, we got it.
Hey, Dr.
Yeah,
Stein,
let him-
I just shared mine with you. Can I actually present today?
Yeah, sure. if you want.
Why? I want to go home, Kyle.
Yeah, we can show you.
I'm trying to go-
It'll be quick. It'll be so quick.
No,
I promise.
no.
It'll be so quick.
You're
Sure.
not
It's
going.
only 1:30.
Hey,
I'm doing it in 2 minutes.
Yay!
Cool. Hey. So this isn't like anything you're gonna like because it's about plants, but I did research on sorghum bicolor at Michigan State last summer, which is a crop that's pretty much the same as corn. It's just not good. And I wanted to see how sorghum reacted to drought on a physiological and genetic level. Okay, so have any of you ever heard of sorghum before? Yeah, no. It looks pretty much exactly like corn. It's a C4 grass, just like corn. And it's a staple crop, not for humans, but it's used in a lot of animal feeds, and it's also used in like gasolines. So we need sorghum and we need a lot of it so that we can produce these, but with drought, drought can easily decimate crop fields completely, and it's the leading contributor to crop loss each year. So my main project goal was to figure out genes that were in sorghum's genome that we could try to bolster up so that we could improve its drought resistance on a genetic level. So my main questions were, does sorghum exhibit any differences in drought tolerance between developmental stages, which I'll talk about soon? And I also looked at, yeah, I just talked in order. The first one, sorry. I wanted to look at if one drought stress versus repeated drought stresses had any different impact on the sorghum, and then I also looked at the developmental stages. And I joined the variables together, so I had 9 different groups of compounding treatments. I drew this fun little picture of sorghum. So the 3 different developmental stages that I'm going to be talking about are vegetative, which is just green leaf growth. Whenever it shoots up out of the ground, there's no fruit yet. Flowering, which is the reproductive stage. Whenever sorghum starts to self-pollinate that flower up there, it turns into the fruiting bud of the grain filling stage, which is harvested for the sorghum crop. So what I actually did, I wasn't at MSU for the growth stage, but what my mentor did is he had 9 different treatments, like I said. The variables were the no water or no drought group, which was just the control, 1 drought, and then 2 drought stresses, and then the 3 developmental stages linked together. So then at each different developmental stage, he conditioned a drought treatment, which was just 1 week of no water flat, and then followed by rehydration after. Once the drought conditioning was finished at each stage, we collected leaf tissue to perform physiology analysis and RNA-seq. Like I just said, 3' RNA sequencing is what we use to collect the transcriptome data, which I worked on, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then I did downstream analysis to see what those genes were actually doing. Okay, so I did a lot of genetic stuff. I didn't do too much on physiology, but I wanted to talk about the physiology stuff since it's a physiology class. So first I looked at relative water content of all of the different treatments that we did. And these are just some box plots with well-watered, which is a control on the bottom, the single stress group, and then the multi-stress group on the top. And the developmental stages are all broken down by color. As you can see, the well-watered stage did the best as I expected. And the single stress actually performed worse than the multi-stress, which I thought was very interesting, bless you, because I was confused about how 2 stresses could lead to more success than 1, but we'll get that into a little bit. So even though those multi-stress plants were performing better, better at conserving water. They did not have much biomass when compared to the well-watered, and they actually had the same biomass as single stress. There was no significant difference between the two groups. So what I think was happening is there was sort of a priming effect where once the sorghum was conditioned once with a treatment, it reacted to the treatment. It obviously reduced its biomass. And then once it was rehydrated, for the second event, it was primed from the first one so that it could respond better and maintain more water so that it could try and survive. But it was a failed effort. Okay, so then for some more physiology data, I looked at the seed weight and seed count for all of the different groups. These are just box plots, but I made them fancier by adding like frequency distributions in them. So wherever it's like thick, that's where most of the data is. So I'll talk about seed weight first. Well-watered had the highest seed weight, which I expected again, along with seed count. That's the control, so I expected that. Single stress, on average, performed about the same in both weight and seed count. Slightly worse than well-watered, but significantly better than the multi-stress. And I thought this was interesting as well, because even though they were conserving water better, the seed weight and the seed counts were much lower than their counterparts. And then I looked at the weight per 100 seeds and found that the multi-stress were actually a lot higher on average whenever I looked at just a subsection of 100 seeds rather than all of the seeds produced by all of the plants. And I found this data because the seeds that they were producing in the multi-stress group were very large compared to the others because it wanted to use all of its energy in the plant to produce a few seeds with higher fitness rather than a bunch of seeds with very little fitness that would not grow. And then I also wanted to highlight something, just forgot, but a trend that I noticed is that the flowering stage, which are the green, always seems to be the lowest, besides this, but for seed weight and seed count. And I thought about it for a little bit, and the flowering stage is actually the reproductive stage of sorghum. So if we're conditioning with drought at the reproductive stage, then it's not going to have any sort of effect for reproduction. So it's going to die off. Okay. Yeah, I cut out the genetic part because it's not a genetics class. But I looked at differential gene expression for the, along with the physiology data. This isn't really important. I just kept this in there to show some cool graphs I made. But essentially what I found is that genes were uniquely expressed significantly higher in the grain filling stage than any other. So as you can see, there's 3,283 genes only expressed in the multi-stressed and single-stress groups. So between multi-stress and single-stress in grain filling, there are 3,000 unique genes. Those aren't seen anywhere else. I don't know why. I didn't have enough time to get into that, but that's something that I would want to look at moving forward. So then for future directions, I tried this, but again, I ran out of time. For all of the differential gene expressions in that Venn diagram, what I see in my data frame is just thousands, even millions of numbers for each gene. So it's basically telling me what gene is upregulated and downregulated from the normal. And what I would want to do from this is do gene ontology on that data set to see what those genes' functions are, so that if a gene is upregulated really high and it's a drought tolerance gene, I know that that gene is something that I would want to look at further. And then these are the lovely people that helped me.
So going forward, you're trying to develop a strain that will be more drought. Yeah, it is important.
Yeah.
No question about it. I mean, that's, we kind of don't think about feeding feed that goes for animals and things like that. It's problematic. It's really, with our weather, inevitably changing. No matter what you make of life, it's changing. It's changing.
Yeah. The Earth's just getting hotter, so this is more important now.
Yeah, sure. Great. Very good. So you got one to go? Can you find that one up here?
Yeah.
Is there like any?
Hurry up.
Yeah, Michael said 2 minutes.
I know, everybody wants to go home, but yeah, Michael went way over his time limit, so.
There's no
Okay.
time limit.
Look who's going after me.
Look who wants to get it done with, I just want to be done.
Why?
This will be quick. I promise. It's not going to be nearly as good as everybody else's.
So,
I spent so much time on this though. They're trying to milk it out. Spend a little bit.
So I started and finished this in between lecture and now.
Perfect.
Before we start, does anybody know what precordial catch syndrome is?
No.
All right. So simply put it, it's like it feels like you're having a heart attack, but you're not. So it is a benign condition that causes sharp localized chest pain, usually right above your heart. It's also known as Textor's twinge, which I didn't know until I was studying it. It actually has no health risk other than just discomfort. My experience, the first time I had it, I thought I was taking my final breath. I told my family, I was like, I love you, goodbye. It hurts really bad, especially if you're going through like a big physical change. So it can happen a lot during puberty. That's when I really had it. It can come up out of nowhere and it will be sharp stabbing pain on the left side of your chest, right above your heart. It could be 3 seconds. The longest I ever had it was for 10 minutes. Usually it's like 3 minutes. The 10-minute one was rough. I was laying on the ground in the fetal position, begging it to stop. Deep breathing or movement can either worsen it or make it better. So it's kind of like trial and error, which you'll see with a lot of the symptoms and treatment. So deep breathing for me made it much, much worse. So I'd have to take like short, shallow breaths. And it can cause anxiety or shortness of breath. So some people get anxiety because they think they're dying. That happened to me the first time. Thank God I got used to it. Causes of precordial catch syndrome, nobody knows why it happens. There is no research behind exactly why it happens. There are a couple of theories though. So you can see irritation of nerves. So this is in the chest lining because a possibility of being irritation of nerves. It can also be irritation of the pleura, which is like your lung lining. And then it could also be muscle strain or spasms of your chest lining can cause it. It's not related to any other problems. So if you have PCS, you don't have heart problems, you don't have lung problems, you just have this discomfort. Diagnosis is based on multiple different characteristic symptoms as well as physical exams. They can do multiple tests to do this. So they can do echocardiograms, you can get a chest x-ray, you can get blood tests. I had an ultrasound when I used to go to the cardiologist. If you've never had an ultrasound before, it is cold. It is really, really cold and does not feel good. And it's also important to rule out other diagnoses. So definitely want to get this checked out, and you don't want to just immediately say it's precordial catch syndrome because you could possibly be having a heart attack. So definitely go get it checked out. Treatment is self-limited and up to each patient completely differently. So like I said, slow deep breaths can work for some people. It made mine worse, so I try not to do that. Applying heat or gently massaging it works a lot. So whenever it hit me really hard at like football practice or track practice, I would literally just like massage underneath of my ribs and it would help and make it go away. So avoid activities or triggering movements. So if you notice to be like, oh, when I lift my arm, it hurts. Stop lifting your arm. Okay. It sounds stupid, but definitely like small stuff like that can really bother it. For me, since I was an athlete, there was really nothing I could do to avoid it just because it happened in my sport a lot. But over-the-counter medications such as acetaminophen or ibuprofen can be used to help it. So I would just pregame every single practice with ibuprofen. It works, so make sure. The most important thing you could do, since there is really no treatment, is just learn how to cope with it. So like this still does affect me, definitely a lot less than it did whenever I was younger. But definitely understand your condition and know that you are not dying. That is the most important part. Because if you think that you're dying, it's going to make it worse because you're going to get really anxious about it. You cannot control how you're treating it. Practice relaxation and treatment. So I know whenever it hits me really hard, I like to sit down and just stretch out as much as I can and take like my shorter breaths. And then you can definitely consult a physician if the pain worsens or you have other concerns and it's affecting different parts of your life. So in conclusion, just review, this is a benign condition that causes sharp localized chest pain. It's not related to any other problems. So if you have this, you're going to be completely fine. It's not going to affect your life other than discomfort. Make sure that you get diagnosed correctly and just know how to cope with it. And most importantly, you are not dying. That's it. Thank you.
What sports did you play?
I did football, wrestling, and track in high school.
So, and did you notice it was associated with any of the activities?
I noticed a lot during conditioning, especially in wrestling, because our conditioning was ridiculous. But I noticed a lot whenever I was running, especially because when I was going through puberty, like I lost a lot of weight. So I was losing weight. I was able to run more, and then it was just a lot on my lungs and everything.
Now, what triggers?
Now, like sometimes at rugby practice, if we have very intense conditioning or if I like stretch a certain way while I'm throwing the ball, it can make it happen. But it will only happen for like a couple seconds to maybe a minute max, not like the 10-minute ones that I used to have.
I had not heard of this one. My eldest, obviously a free ball, something called vasovagal syndrome.
I've heard of that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it sounded a little bit, it's not the pain part.
Yeah.
It's almost like a weakness, it's almost like all of a sudden, it's like you're ready to collapse.
Yes, that's happened to me before too. From this, like I've been fatigued. There was one time it hit me really bad at track practice, to where like I did fall to the ground. And I just couldn't stand back up.
And he was really concerned, they had to do a whole series of tests.
Yeah.
To make sure that what exactly it was and whether it was something that could protect you. I mean, if you're in command, and all of a sudden you have that, and you obviously
Yeah.
get orders.
Yeah, I remember there was a point whenever I was in around like 10th grade that I used to see the cardiologist like 2 times a month. I would have to go see him all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a critical piece, everybody. We don't really think about things like that. When you have something like that, get it checked. Just make sure, you gotta go to somebody who's not gonna, and it's a big problem with them. You see young, healthy individuals like you, go, it's just stress. For
Mhm.
women, they'll say, migraine, stress, tension, migraine, it's gotta be.
Yeah. Or especially if you're, they used to tell me it was just growing pains.
Yeah,
And I was like, these are not growing pains.
Growing pains, I had so many kids come in, and I'm sitting there, well, we brought it, but we know it's growing pains. Well, the reality is, there's a lot of things that can be occurring that were, pain's potentially a problem. If it is growing pains, I tell them. If it wasn't, then it's something that has to be worked up further. But that's okay. So you can't, the attitude of dismissiveness because somebody physically appears healthy is a problem. And it works the other way. If somebody, the fact that somebody isn't in great shape or isn't, or may appear to have some type of demonstrable or visual oddity, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. All right, look, we got 5 of these done. There's only 20 of you.
Easy.
So we got 4 more days to do this. On not Wednesday, obviously, but on Friday. I need 5 more.
Okay.
I'm gonna be so on it.
Get on it, Jacob.
I'm skipping all my classes. You won't be here,
Where are
Sure,
you
you know, I'll make 5 of them. I'll just hand them out. And we can all just do it randomly.
You sound like my brother. You sound like my brother every time he calls me.
I'm busy, yeah. We're busy.
Okay, so
They're so decent.
who are you with?
It's okay. Tell me. I'm not here.
That's a leech. He is a leech. He clings on and doesn't let go.
You're probably a little bit older than me. I
Kobe.
Oh, we don't like
Yeah.
that.
Not a joke.
Not a jail. Perfect. Sounds like my dad. He's going to jail now. But you and your dad jokes today. I feel nervous about it.
What are we gonna do with you? It's all right. We able to, I made the 90 minutes, so is it gonna work for you?
Yeah.
It's, that's kind of why I made it. I figure it was, because most of these guys are gonna get done with it a lot faster, but I want you to have the extra. Very good, goodbye. That was painless.